All right, we are live. So, welcome everyone. I know you guys are going to be rolling in as the moments go on, but as you all know, as I mentioned earlier today, I have Blake Choisnet with us tonight. This is the BRRRR expert. All right, guys. So we're going to be diving deep. I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to get some people rolling in here. But I'm super excited to talk with you, Blake. We've been communicating back and forth now. I've been, learning about your business, vice versa. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for coming and spending the evening with us tonight to bless us with this information that we can all take advantage of.
Of course, yeah, glad to be here.
Yes. So tell me a little bit, just about yourself. I know right now you're in Texas, and you guys are experiencing some crazy stuff out there, huh?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we haven't had water for about 72 days, or 72 days. It feels like that long. 72 hours. No. Yeah, there's been some water mains breaking in the city. In fact, we've got friends over right now. My wife is making dinner for a few friends that they've just kind of run out of food, and but no. So I'm super thrilled to be here, even amongst the ice apocalypse that's happening.
I know this is absurd. We're all experiencing this together. So, I'm grateful again for you being here during this time. So it means so much to me and our community. So the whole thing right behind us getting together is we noticed that there was an opportunity for us both, right? So we have a lot of people that are wholesaling, right? And it's kind of a great entry point for people to get into real estate investing if they don't have a lot of capital, maybe not have the best credit, right? And you always hear about, you can make all this money, right, with wholesaling. And then it's like, okay, well, what do you do next, right? If you are making money with wholesaling, or even if you have some money set aside, like what are the other options to do next, right? And the BRRRR strategy, that's where you come in. So I want to first and foremost go over what is the BRRRR strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way that I explain it is historically, you have two really well-known, famous models in real estate, right? You've got flipping and you've got turnkey rentals, right? So wholesaling, BRRRR, those are all a little bit more nuanced, where like the average, no one's talking about that around their kitchen table, right? So Chip and Joe made flipping really, really famous, and people have known about 20% down turnkey for a little while. Both of them are great, but they don't provide scalable passive income. So what the BRRRR model does is it actually synthesizes those two. So what you do is you buy a property like you're going to flip it. So let's say you buy a property for $50,000 and you put $20,000 into it to get it back up to its market quality.
Right.
And at that quality, it's worth $100,000. So that means you might still say, $70,000, but you own that $30,000 of equity that you created. What a flipper would do is they would sell that property and they'd take that money, they'd feed their family, they'd go on a trip or whatever it might be.
Right.
But instead, what the BRRRR model says is it says, instead of selling that property, take that property to the bank and refinance it, because the bank is going to loan you up to 80% of the value of your house, which means on a $100,000 house, you've got $80,000 to work with. So you bring it to the bank and they say, okay, we can only loan you $80,000. And you say, that's perfect. I only owe 70. And so you wrap in some closing costs and some interest payments, and you can end up very reasonably with a cash flowing property that's, $400 a month, bottom line, after expenses are paid. Cash flowing property for little or no money out of pocket. So that's what the BRRRR model is focused on. So it's an acronym. It stands for buy, rehab, rent, refinance, and repeat. So just do it again. Because when you refinance that property, if you've put your money in it or you've borrowed a private lender's money, you pay them off and now they've got their money back and they'll do it again. So it allows you a little bit of leverage to be able to then scale. And so that's the method as a whole.
Gotcha. So with this method, right, when you're out there looking for deals, are you kind of using the same formula like you would if you're wholesaling, in a sense? If are you looking for those discounted type properties, or are you able to do this type of strategy with your standard retail?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the market. But generally what I'm teaching my students is, and this is great for any of your students that want to get into BRRRR at some point, The nice part is they already understand the wholesaling side.
Right.
So they might actually be able to get it at a lower discount, because what I'm doing is I'm paying wholesalers.
Right.
So wholesalers go out. Vast majority of my students and my properties personally come through wholesalers. So I'd say 90% of them. So I make relationships with these wholesalers. They bring me a good deal, and I'm happy to pay them. I'm happy to pay them their assignment fee as long as the numbers work for me.
Right.
And so most of them are coming through wholesalers, but there are some markets that MLS still makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's fewer and further between.
Right.
Every now and again, you'll have someone that does some, like I've done some direct to seller type of engagements in order to get seller financing deals or things similar to that, or maybe subject to deals. But in general, I'm getting my deals from wholesalers.
Okay. Okay. So you're getting those from wholesalers, and that's the beauty of wholesaling, right? It's kind of like a fundamental in the sense of being able to find those discounted. I mean, if you can find them, you can wholesale them, you can burn them, you can flip them, right? You have so many things at your leisure, and you're able to kind of save that, if you can, that assignment fee. But if the numbers make sense, hey, the numbers make sense, which what really matters at the end of the day, right? So you find this property. Now you can do this with like a conventional, like what type of, are you only able to do this with traditional lending, hard money lending?
That's a good question. You can do it with conventional loans and commercial loans. So initially there's really two parts, because there's the first loan to get in, the purchase plus rehab that you need to borrow someone, unless you've got that money sitting around.
Right.
Most of the time people don't just have that money disposable to be able to do whatever they want with it. Yeah. They've got maybe some confidence money, 10 grand, 15 grand in a savings account in case something were to catch on fire, but either literally or figuratively. Right. And so they borrow that money, say from a private lender being an individual, someone that's just got money to be able to lend to somebody else. They don't want it to burn a hole in their pocket, but they also don't want to expose it to the volatility of the market. Yeah. So they lend it to you at 10 or 12%.
Right.
So that's the first loan. You could also do a hard money loan. Hard money. The challenge that you get into with your first property is sometimes private lenders will say, well, what's your history? How many have you done? And you say, well, this is my first one. Even if you've got a great teacher, sometimes it's harder to convince them unless they're like family, friend, relative, or maybe a really trusted acquaintance. So there's that option. There's also hard money, which is a little bit more institutional. Think of it as like a mini bank, maybe a handful of people that raise capital. That's their specialty. Right. And let's say they get it loaned to them at 6%, and then they go loan it to somebody else at 10, 11, 12, whatever. Right. So that's the first part. But then when you refinance on that side of things, you've got one of two options. You can put it under your own name. That would be a conventional loan. The benefits to that are you get the best rates. Right now it's 3% or something silly like that. Just incredible rates. Right. The other option would be putting it under, say, an LLC and doing a commercial loan. And so there are multiple reasons for that. If you're 1099 or you're self-employed, you've got to have 2 years documented income in order to get a conventional loan, because it's backed federally by Freddie and Fannie. So that's one challenge. If you're 1099 or self-employed, it's going to be way more difficult for you to get a conventional loan, which is fine because there's commercial loans. Yeah. And even at some point, you can only have 10 commercial loans on your name. So at some point, you're going to have to add a different loan type to your portfolio. Commercial loans, you'll find usually they'll have a shorter amortization term. So instead of 30 years, they're 20 years. But you can find commercial loans amortized over 30 years. There are some programs for HUD or Section 8 that would allow you to amortize it over 40 years, which is really great for cash flow. But it's a pretty significant barrier to entry as far as just logistics and operation and paperwork and stuff like that. Right. So that's one. The other trade-off that you take is usually about 1.5 on interest rate. So I'd say right now, commercial loans, you're looking at like 5%. And which again is fine if the numbers work, but that's just something that you've got to know going into it. So even if you don't have, say, good credit, one of the benefits of using a commercial loan is they care more about the performance of the property than your actual credit, which is good. Conventional loans not the same way. If you've got bad credit, then you'll pay for it either in the rate or they just won't loan to you. But what they care about on the commercial side is the debt service coverage ratio, which essentially answers the question, of the debt that you took on for this property,
Mm-hmm.
what percentage of that are you bringing in? Is it 1.1% or 110%, 150%? They want to make sure they're going to get paid back. Right.
Exactly. Right.
And so they care more about the property, which is nice if you're in a less favorable credit position.
Okay. That's awesome. Those are some great gems there, because a lot of people, we don't know, like, where's the best place. So just to know that you have some options is phenomenal.
Yeah.
So when you get in there, right, you bought it, and now you're going to be renovating this property, or rehabbing this property, right? So speak on that. So when you're doing these renovations, right, I'm guessing, because when you're going to refinance, it has to be in order for you to get the money, the cash out. So you can't go in there and kind of like do
lipstick on a pig. You can't just duct tape things up. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's got to be done right.
Yeah.
So for the rehab part, I do everything remotely, and which sounds like your program is similar in that it teaches people how to do it, either whether they're in the market or not. They can find markets that are really favorable for real estate, which is fantastic, because I spent about 10 years of my life living in Austin, and it's just, I would have to bring $100,000 to the table if I bought a median home price just to be able to rent it out, and then I wouldn't be able to cash flow it, right? So I'm able to find the cash flowing markets. So that adds a nuance to it, because I'm not going to be there to drive by, to check in and make sure they're not just twiddling their thumbs, or actually make sure the contractor's actually at my property getting things done. And so there's some nuance there, but as far as rehab goes, it can be simplified down to working with your contractor and saying, I want rental grade rehab. So what I tell my students is we're not making a Cadillac, we're making a Camry.
Gotcha.
So the way that represents itself is, we're not going to put in, those touch sensitive sinks. We're not going to put in quartz countertops. We're going to do laminate. We're not going to do it brand new hardwood floors. We're going to do laminate floors or vinyl floors. And so those are the types of things that we're evaluating. Essentially, I'm looking for one of three things. In order for me to pay to fix it, it needs to have one of three qualities. It either needs to increase my rentability. So that would be things like cosmetic things, or maybe make the kitchen a little bit more user friendly, because people really care about the kitchen, or a bathroom. Kitchens and bathrooms are really what people really care about. So that one, it's either got to do that, or it's got to increase the value of my home from the bank's lens or an appraiser's lens, because that allows me to get money out. Because if I do a really good job, I could theoretically walk away from close with $10,000 and a cash flowing property, which one of my students did. And so if you find, I'm thinking for your students, if you find a really good property, you say, maybe I'll keep this one, fix it up and figure out how to do it. And then you kind of get a double whammy, basically. And so that's the second one. Does it increase my value? And then the last one is, does it protect me from future issues like foundation? You should probably fix the foundation. Or if there's a big old hole in the roof, it's going to ruin everything else, right? So those three things are what I'm looking for. But we're not trying to make it super fancy, because my goal is to have this property for 40 years. And it doesn't need to have quartz countertops. So, but I do want it to feel a certain way for them, so that people will rent it, and they'll pay market rate, or maybe even a little bit of a premium to rent it, because it's newly renovated, right? They're not having to deal with, the frustrations that come with something that hasn't been taken care of.
Right. And for the rents, right? Because so many people, you hear it all the time. I don't want to have rentals because I'm afraid of having bad tenants, right? And it's like, look, at the end of the day, no matter what you do, there's always a possibility of something, right? So all you want to do is do what you can to mitigate those risks, right? So do you have any one thing that you really like to do when you're looking for your tenants, to do your best in selecting the best tenants out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer is, I don't select tenants. I offshore that, or I outsource it. So I want this to be passive for me. And when I say passive, I mean, I want to spend less than 30 minutes a month on my portfolio.
Uh-oh. I think my camera went out. Hold on one second. Can you still hear me though?
I can still hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay, you can keep talking.
I'll keep talking while you do the technical difficulty. Thanks for everybody's patience.
Yes.
So So as far as picking tenants, I want to work on my portfolio less than 30 minutes a month. And this is after I've fixed up the property and done everything, just it's steady state. So I don't want 2 a.m. calls about someone's toilet not flushing, or I don't want to have to deal with those.
Right.
So what I've got to do is find a property manager that's a really good property manager. And it can represent itself a couple ways, but I want someone that's going to treat this property like it's their property.
Right.
So for example, if a tenant has an issue with a toilet, I don't want them sending in a $200 an hour plumber. I want them to ask, hey, did you jiggle the handle? Did you check the flap thing? Did you flush a diaper down the toilet?
Yeah.
So I want them to deal with it like that. So I need to curate and make sure I've got a really good property manager, which is one way that can save you a lot of money. But then I offshore that to them and I say, you're responsible for leasing it. You're responsible for keeping it leased. You're that's all yours. And if the fix costs less than $500, I just do it. I don't even want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And so they only get paid if I get paid.
Right.
So they get 10% of every month that they pay rent. And that's part of my agreement. I'm not getting a fee if someone's not in there and if they're not paying rent.
Right.
And so I'm creating incentives for them that are mutualistic to what I need. Right. And so that's the way that I deal with tenants. And one of the things, when I'm interviewing a property manager, I'll ask them, what's your turnover rate? What's your rent rate? The people that are actually paying of everybody that you manage.
Right. Right.
But yeah, that's a good question, because I don't want to have those questions. I don't want to have to show properties or pick tenants or.
Yes.
I've got a bleeding heart. I'd feel so badly for somebody and be like, you know what? Don't pay rent this month, or something like that. And over the course of a large portfolio, that's just not a great idea.
Yes. No, totally. And the thing that I love that you mentioned here is like, not only are you have the capability of doing this virtually in different markets, and it's passing. I mean, this is like a win-win-win all the way around. Mm-hmm. So when you going into, you got your you bought the property, you did your reno, you got your tenants in there now, and now you're in the phase of potential refinancing. I heard something about a seasoning. So is there like a certain time frame in which you may have to wait until you can do this, or you do it
That's
right?
a great question. So for those that aren't familiar with the term, seasoning is essentially the amount of time that you have to own the property before you can refinance. Mm-hmm. And the seasoning length is determined by the new lender. So the new lender that's going to refinance the property, they'll say, we've got a 6-month seasoning requirement. What that means is you have to own the property for 6 months before we'll refinance for you.
Gotcha.
And it's essentially, it's their way of protecting themselves. Every lending agency is optimized for a certain method, like lending on single family rentals or lending on large commercial properties in the millions. Everybody's optimized. So you want to find someone that's optimized for what you're focused on.
Right.
And there are lots of banks, typically local banks, that will have no seasoning requirements. And so you can literally get in. The ideal situation is close on a property, rehab, they show up and start the next day. Let's say it takes 6 weeks, and about 2 weeks before it's done, you start working with the bank to get your paperwork in order so that the appraisal is ordered right after they finish. Because the most beautiful that property is ever going to be is right after rehab and right before anybody starts making it dirty. Right. And that's where you want them to see it. Right. You want them to see at your best, at the property's best. Right. And so that you get the really high valuation, and you could either have more equity in it, which then you can kind of equity share on a portfolio loan and potentially even buy a turnkey property without any money out of your property. So there's some really creative solutions that you can employ, but I think it's very easy to get 6 months seasoning. Yeah. And so I've had people do that. I've done it myself, but most of the time I'm working with either 0 or 3 months seasoning, which is completely doable as long as the numbers make sense on the front end. So you run the numbers ahead of time, knowing what your exit plan is instead of just jumping in and hoping that it works out.
Right. Absolutely. That's a good point, and very important to make note of that. So tell me, like, when you're doing this, I would love to hear maybe an example of you or one of your students of just kind of how this whole process, went, right? Because this is phenomenal, like to be able to get into these projects with getting your money out. So really at the end all be all, having not only no cash in, but actually give it cash back to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So I'll say, I'm thinking of one of my students. He found a really good deal in Abilene, Texas, and that's my market. So if you're a wholesaler in Abilene and you find a great deal, let me know, BlakeChoisnet.com. I mean, I'll buy it from you. Okay. Yes. So Abilene is my market. He's also in Abilene. He found a really great deal. I want to say he bought it for 45.
Okay.
He put 20 into it. So now he's all in at 65 and it appraised at around 120. And so what happened was he actually walked away from closing with a little bit over $10,000 that he cashed out. He could have brought more out, but at that point, it's a question of, do I want more cash flow for a longer period of time, or do I want 10 grand in my pocket right now?
Yeah.
And that's the hard part, is because we're kind of trained to say that money in your pocket means wealth.
Right.
Money in your pocket means rich. It doesn't mean wealth.
Yes.
Wealth is measured in time. So how long could you go if you lost your job? How long could you survive at your current rate, essentially? And financial freedom is when that number is infinity, right? Your passive income exceeds your expenses.
Exactly.
And so he took $10,000 out, and his property cash flows $436 a month.
Oh,
and that's
God.
After expenses, after everything.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
And the best part about it is one, he did it without any of his own money. And two, he got that private lender's money back and is doing it again. So he's on his third property now.
Wow.
And so that's just
super happy.
Remarkable. Yeah. So that's just fantastic.
Yeah. And I know those lenders are like, yeah, sure. Like, we'll do this again. I mean, they're paying them back in such a short time, super reliable. That's awesome. And it makes me think of like stocks in a sense, right? Where some people are, you want to get into a stock because you hear it's the hot new thing. You want to just buy it so that you can get the money out as quickly as possible. And then there's those that, like you said, again, you're in it for the long term. You're in it for the 10, 20 year. And at the end of the day, those people that are in it long term, those are, if you look at the numbers comparatively, they're going to be the ones that, win over and over and over. So this seems like a longer term ish, but having an amazing return long term and short term, even getting some capital right out within months if the project goes well. Yeah.
One thing that's fantastic about it is, with stocks, you're kind of forced to convince yourself, rightly or wrongly, that you're buying low. Because everybody knows buy low, sell high.
Right.
Easy concept, very, very difficult to actually implement correctly.
Right.
And so you want to try and buy low, but the cool thing about the BRRRR model is it's very clear when something is low, because you've got four really key numbers: the ARV, the after repair value, the rent, the rehab, and how much the purchase price is.
Right.
So when your wholesalers are talking to somebody that's doing the BRRRR model, the purchase price is the only thing they can wiggle on, because these are told to them by the market. Right. So the rent, a 3-bed, 2-bath, you can list it for $3,000, but in Abilene, you're not getting anywhere near there. You might try and game it, but the market will respond and tell you what it's worth. And so when you buy that $50,000 house, before you actually close on it, you look at all the comparables around it. And you can determine this is actually worth $100,000. You could buying a cheap house is not the win. In fact, I had someone try and sell me. They wanted to sell me a $5,000 house. It was a 3-bed, 1-bath, wasn't in great shape. And initially, anybody would say this is fantastic.
Right.
But I found out he actually bartered the house for a boat, and it was in a community of about 200 people. So he couldn't get it rented, and there were people in there that he thought would be able to pay rent. They hadn't paid rent in a year. And part of the deal was you got to deal with the eviction. And I said, that's just not what I want to take on. Right. So buying a cheap house isn't the sweet spot. Buying a cheap house when it's actually worth a lot is a really great position to be in. And that's almost like stocks, but when you can you can quantify how
Exactly.
low you're buying, knowing that it's actually going to be where Tesla is or where Amazon is.
Right.
And then you just ride it out over the long term because you
Yeah.
didn't have to put any money in, but you've got that cash flow coming in.
Yeah, because I mean, not only you're getting the cash flow, you're getting the potential refi out, and the appreciation over that time frame. So like you're still building that equity
Yeah.
long term. So I mean, this is
Yeah.
such an amazing model that I think, again, I don't hear about it much. It needs to be talked about a lot more.
Mhm.
This is phenomenal. This is some great information here. So
Yeah.
what would you say, like, somebody that's just, getting started, they got some cash. What would you recommend their maybe first step be in looking into this, getting into this strategy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm certainly happy to have a conversation with them and talk about whether it fits their goals. But I've
Yeah,
talked to multiple different people that they say, I want to get into real estate. And you've probably had the similar situation. I want to get into real estate. And then you ask, well, why?
yeah,
And if their goal is because they want to flip, that's not really their goal. Their end goal is, I want to make money. Well, how
right,
do you want it to be passive? What do you want? And one guy said, well, I want to learn how to like frame out a house and do all this stuff. I said, I'm just not the right person. I'll connect you to the right person, but
right,
that's not my sweet spot. It's not what I want to do, and it's not what I do. Right.
right.
So I'm certainly happy to have a conversation with them. Bigger Pockets is always a great place. There's, David Green's got a book on the BRRRR model, BRRRR, buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat.
Right.
That would be a good read for them. But the Bigger Pockets, it has a pro. It's fantastic in connecting people. Sometimes if you're trying to implement a specific strategy, it's difficult to put all those pieces together.
Right.
But Bigger Pockets is certainly a great spot for it. So you could also read, but really, I think people have, when you're trying to figure out how am I going to act in real estate, you've got one of two choices. You can either do the DIY method, or as I call it, the School of Hard Knocks. That's how I started. I started out with the School of Hard Knocks. I set aside $10,000 of stupid money, like tuition, that I knew I was going to have to pay because I wanted to learn, and I didn't know of anybody that taught it. I didn't know that there were Jasmines available, right? And so my first deal, I bought a house for $18,500, 3-bed, 1-bath, and I thought, I've won. And then my contractor walked off with 12 grand. And so that gut punched me. And the crazy thing is that house is still very profitable for me.
Wow.
So I even made incredible mistakes, but it's still making me money. And now I've kind of shored all those things up. So you've got the DIY side of things, which is, do it yourself. You save some money on the front end, potentially, but you run the risk of paying tuition on the back end as a surprise. Yes. Or you can have someone walk you through the process, which is like what you do and what I do. Yep. And the hope is that we're able to minimize their exposure to risk and making silly decisions that could have been prevented. And we have to move faster. Yes. And so I think that's really the decision that they've got to make is, what direction do I want to go? And how am I actually going to implement that? Yeah. And so if that's where you're at, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. Yeah. So if anybody mentions that to you, I'm happy to talk with them.
Yeah. And tell us, guys, I mean, if you are even remotely thinking about real estate investing, getting some deals, right? Actually investing. So the wholesaling side, that's more, potentially building capital up. Maybe you've done that and now you're saying, okay, what's next for me, right? This is a great strategy that you guys can consider. And Blake is right here, an expert for you guys. So if you have any questions, are interested in learning more, he coaches, he can help you directly with, like he said, minimizing these risks, getting into this strategy, learning the best tips and tricks to expedite your experience. So definitely, where would you like people to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can go to my website at BlakeChoisnet.com. The last name is French, so it's spelled weird. Blake, Choisnet. You can also, my portfolio website is rootedlandco.com, and that just redirects to BlakeChoisnet.com.
Okay,
you can
and
also
put that in the comment. Once we hop off, we'll put all the links in the comments, guys. Make sure you go check out all of his pages. Follow him, give him a call, give him a ring. And you actually just put out a report that I took a look at. It was great. So it was tell me the name of that report again.
Yeah, it's the top 10 cash flow markets in the United States. And
Yes.
I hired a software developer to pull data from a bunch of, the census, the Department of Labor. And the challenge with those reports is usually they're just based on property value growth.
Mm-hmm.
So the top 10 real estate markets are Austin and the Bay Area and all these places that you can't cash flow.
Right.
And so I don't know of anything like it. And those top 10, you can go to my website. I've got it as a free gift that you can download. And I list out all of the different 10 markets and then some honorable mentions. And I talk about each of those markets, what the driving factors are, the rent to price ratio versus, the property value entry point and things like that. So people are welcome to get that report as well.
Yes. So we'll definitely put the link in the comments of as well, so that you guys can get access to that report. I got it myself. It was great. It was great. So you definitely find some value in that. Well, Blake, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come share this information, valuable information with us, and giving us real life ways that we can go out there, implement these strategies. And I'm just looking forward to continue building with you. So everybody that's here, thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Again, make sure you go check out Blake everywhere. And Blake, thank you again so much.
Of course. Yeah.
And
thanks.
be safe. And I hope that this ice storm goes past.
I promise. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye.